My newly married daughter's funeral felt strange. While I was crying, I received a message from her phone.
I can see just fine, boss.
Dad, I'm alive. It is not a hallucination.
Give me the
hallucination.
Grief makes you see things.
They're just vitamins for your heart.
My doctor never prescribed just vitamins that can stop one.
You're paranoid. Grief's eating your brain.
No, just breakfast. You can choke on your lies instead.
Nice.
For the record, all transfers require his explicit approval.
Then make him sign.
Today, I sign nothing. You open up or I'll take what's mine.
You can't take what you never earned.
You doddering fool, sign the deed and be done.
Please, just talk to me. We can fix this.
You fixed it when you proved who you are.
Enjoy your empty house, old man.
At my daughter's funeral, I thought the worst pain was losing her. But hours later, her phone proved me wrong. Dad, I'm alive. That message exposed the cruel truth. My wife and son-in-law had planned everything, waiting to take my $4.5 million fortune. The betrayal was deeper than death itself, and it was only the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room of my house, the house I had poured my whole life into, a place now worth nearly $750,000. The quiet of the evening pressed down on me, the kind of silence that is heavier than any noise, and I felt the weight of memories clinging to every corner of the room. My hand brushed across the arm of the couch, the same couch where Laura used to curl up with her books when she was still in college, and my heart twisted. I had paid over $60,000 in tuition to give her that education, believing in her dreams, believing in the bright future she deserved. I had even surprised her with a $25,000 car on her graduation day just so she could start her career without worry. I can still picture her face that day, her arms wrapped around my neck, her tears falling onto my shoulder, as she said, "Dad, you've done too much for me." I had smiled and told her that's what fathers do. That's what family means. But now, sitting in this room surrounded by the echoes of sacrifices I had made, I couldn't help but feel those very sacrifices had been twisted into weapons aimed directly at me. The house itself was more than just a building. It was the heart of our family, with its wooden floors I had laid myself, each board nailed down with the sweat of my youth. The mantel still held our wedding picture, Susan in her white gown, myself beaming like a fool in love. Next to it was Laura's baby photo, her tiny hand gripping my thumb. For decades, this house had stood as the symbol of everything I worked for. Every late night at the office, every dollar saved, every dream I held for my family. I also had a savings account of nearly $400,000, built slowly and carefully, meant to provide comfort in my later years, and perhaps a legacy for Laura. That account and this house were supposed to be the anchors of our family. Now, both were under threat, caught in the greedy hands of Susan and Kevin, my own wife and my son-in-law. The thought of losing this house, of watching strangers or betrayers claim it, felt like someone was trying to rip my heart right out of my chest. The sting of Laura's funeral was still raw. I had stood there among the lilies and whispered goodbye to what I thought was her lifeless body. My knees had trembled as I left the gravesite, thinking no pain could be greater. But when the message arrived from her phone that night, those words, "Dad, I'm alive," the ground shifted beneath me. My grief was cut open, replaced by confusion and a growing, burning fury. And when the truth came crashing in, that Susan, the woman I had loved for 30 years, had known all along, had been part of this sick game with Kevin and his mother Evelyn, my world collapsed again. My wife, the woman who held my hand at Laura's birth, the one who sat beside me during years of hardship, had chosen betrayal over loyalty, greed over love. That betrayal didn't just wound me. It hollowed me out, left me questioning everything I thought was real. I found myself staring at the photograph on the mantel, our wedding picture, the smiles frozen in time. My throat tightened, and for the first time in decades, I whispered to that photograph, almost as if I could reach across the years to the woman I once knew. "Susan," I said quietly, "you betrayed not only me, but our daughter too." "Too." The words tasted bitter. They trembled in the air and fell back on me like ashes. I had gone from mourning to suspicion, and now I was stepping into anger, the kind of anger that shakes your bones. I no longer felt like the same man I had been even a week ago. I was stripped of illusions, raw and aware. If they thought I was weak, if they thought grief would make me easy prey, they were wrong. I could feel something rising in me, a fire that had been smothered by years of trust and love, now breaking loose because of betrayal. The late afternoon light filtered in through the curtains, bathing the room in a golden glow that used to make me feel at peace. I looked at the old recliner in the corner, the one where I had read Laura her bedtime stories night after night when she was still small enough to climb into my lap. The sun caught the fabric, and for a moment I could almost see her sitting there, her head resting against my chest, her tiny voice begging, "One more story, Dad." That chair, that simple chair, carried 1,000 memories, but tonight it carried a different weight. It reminded me of everything I had given, everything I had protected, and everything that was now being ripped apart by the very people who were supposed to stand beside me. The betrayal felt sharper in this light, like the universe was mocking me with images of love while tearing it apart at the same time. I walked to the cabinet where I kept important papers, my hands trembling as I opened the drawer. Among the stacks of old tax returns and household bills, I found what I was looking for, Laura's life insurance policy. $1 million. I held the document in my hands, staring at the printed numbers, the legal language that suddenly felt like both a shield and a weapon. That money, meant to support her family if tragedy struck, had become another piece of bait in this twisted plot. My chest tightened as I realized Susan and Kevin had likely counted on it, schemed around it, planned to cash it in as part of their betrayal. But now, I had it. I had proof, leverage, and the beginnings of a way to fight back. My anger sharpened into resolve. I knew then that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a broken old man waiting to be discarded. I was a father, a husband betrayed, a man who still held the keys to his own destiny. I sat back down, the insurance policy in my lap, and let the silence wash over me again. The air smelled faintly of old wood and the lilies Susan had insisted on keeping after the funeral. I hated that smell now. It clung to the house like a reminder of death, but I refused to let it be the final word. "I won't let them destroy us, Laura," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "I won't let them take everything I built." Saying those words out loud gave me strength, like I was speaking directly to her spirit, promising her that her father would not surrender. I realized in that quiet moment that grief had transformed into something else. It had become a weapon, and I would wield it not for vengeance alone, but for justice, for the protection of everything I had spent my life building. The chapter of my life where I was blind and trusting had ended. A new chapter was beginning, one where I would no longer be the victim of lies. My house, my savings, the legacy of my daughter, my very dignity, none of it would be stolen while I still had breath in my lungs. I had been betrayed, yes, but I was not defeated. Not yet. And as the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the floor, I knew in my bones what I had to do. I would fight. I would confront them. I would make sure this betrayal was the last mistake they ever made. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before dawn to the sound of the heater kicking on and the old pipes rattling like bones in the walls. The house felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. I made coffee the way I always do. 2 scoops, a slow pour, steam rising in the quiet kitchen like a prayer that didn't know where to go. I stood at the window and looked out at the maple tree by the curb. Years ago, Laura used to rake those leaves into big piles and run through them, her laughter bouncing off the siding. The street was empty now, only the trash cans and a newspaper on the neighbor's lawn. I took a sip and told myself this was the day I would stop feeling helpless. I would do something. I would act. I set the mug on the table and pulled the folder toward me. Insurance papers, bank statements, a faded copy of the deed. The numbers stared back like blunt facts. A house worth about $750,000. A savings account with roughly $400,000. The things I worked for. The things I maintained, fixed, painted, and protected. The things Susan and Kevin had circled were like vultures. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the ache that came with the memory of Lily's and the closed casket and that message that should not have existed. Dad, I'm alive. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and reached for the phone. When Attorney Daniels answered, his voice was calm, the kind of calm you hear from a man who has guided other people through storms before. I kept my own voice steady. I told him I needed him today, not next week, not later. Today. He didn't ask for a long story. He said to come at 9, that he would clear his schedule. I thanked him, hung up, and then called the bank. The woman on the line confirmed my identity. I gave her the account numbers. I asked for an immediate freeze on the savings account, $400,000. I asked for alerts on any attempt to move funds or add signers. I asked her to note my wife was not to be added, not to be given access, not to be humored with any family convenience talk. The woman paused and then said she understood. She told me she had set the account to require in-person authorization from me and me alone, with a PIN that I changed while she waited. When I ended the call, my hand shook a little, but not from fear, from relief. I had taken the first step back to myself. At 9 sharp, I walked into Daniel's office with my folder pressed to my chest. His office smelled like leather and old books and fresh coffee. There were framed diplomas on the wall and a clock that ticked softly, steady and patient. He offered me a seat. He listened without interrupting as I laid out the last few days in plain words. The funeral, the message, the suspicion that grew teeth, the look in Susan's eyes when she spoke about moving on before the flowers had even wilted, the sudden kindness from Kevin, the constant presence of Evelyn at our table as if she'd always lived there, the numbers, the house, the savings. The policy is for $1 million. My voice was level, but I could hear the gravel in it, the where. Daniels leaned forward. He asked for dates, times, names of banks. He asked where the original deed was kept, where the life insurance policy was stored, who the beneficiaries were, and when they were last updated. He asked if I had reason to believe documents had been copied, or if I had ever left my files unattended with Susan or Kevin nearby. I gave him what I could remember. He took notes in neat lines, his pen scratching softly. When I finished, he placed both hands on the legal pad and looked at me the way a good doctor looks at you before he tells you what needs to be done. We started with the simple parts. He had me sign a letter revoking any informal permissions I might have given Susan to handle accounts. He drafted a notice to the bank confirming the freeze and the single authority status. He prepared a directive to the life insurance company, noting that no claims were to be processed without direct verification from me and our attorney of record. He photocopied my driver's license and scanned my documents. He asked if I had a digital backup, and I admitted I did not. He made one and handed me an encrypted flash drive. When he was done, he tapped his pen against the table twice, a small habit, and said we would meet again very soon. He advised me not to confront anyone until we had more in place. He suggested I keep my routine outwardly the same while he made a few quiet inquiries of his own. He looked me in the eye before I left. "You're not alone in this," he said. That simple sentence lowered something tight in my chest. On the drive home, I turned off the radio and listened to the road. My mind was clearer than it had been in days. I took the long way back, past the park where Laura learned to ride her bike, past the little diner where Susan and I used to split cherry pie on Friday nights, past the hardware store where I bought the stain for the floors I laid with my own hands. The world looked the same, but I wasn't the same. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Susan's car. I sat for a minute and watched the porch, watched the curtains, watched the door. The leaves were moving in the breeze. A wind chime clinked. Finally, I went in. Susan was at the kitchen island with a yellow legal pad, a few envelopes, and the latest mail. She looked up and gave me a soft smile that might have convinced a stranger. It did not convince me. She poured coffee and slid a mug toward me like a hostess in a commercial. She started talking about practical things: utilities, property taxes, the lawn maintenance bill. Halfway through, she changed the subject the way a driver changes lanes when the highway opens up. Smooth, casual. "We should talk about the house," she said. My hand paused on the mug. She kept her voice light. "The market is high. It might be a good time to sell, or at the very least, transfer a portion. Kevin needs stability, poor thing. He's lost so much." I stared at the marble countertop. I watched a droplet of coffee creep along the rim of my mug and fall like a small, slow tear. I lifted my eyes and saw hers waiting. "You mean transfer part of the title," I said. She nodded with concern arranged carefully on her face. "Only a portion," she said. "Just enough to give him security. Maybe 25%. We can update the deed now and get everything recorded right away. It would be a gracious gesture, given all of this." She gestured in a small circle that seemed to include the lilies on the table, the photographs, the entire weight of our loss. I felt my jaw tighten. "Right away," I repeated. She nodded again, relieved at what she thought she heard. She began to talk in small, practical sentences about forms, a notary, and the county office. Her pen tapped the pad. My heart beat slow and heavy. The words, "right away," stretched between us like a wire. I forced my shoulders to loosen. I made my voice quiet, almost weary. "Let's not rush," I said, "but yes, we can explore it." Her eyes brightened. She reached out and put her hand over mine. It felt like ice. "Thank you," she said. "Kevin will be so grateful." She squeezed. "We'll make this easier for everyone." Kevin came over that evening with a grocery bag in his arms and a grief-stricken softness arranged on his face. He said he had brought soup, the kind Laura liked. He said he couldn't eat much himself, but he wanted to be useful. He moved with careful, deliberate gestures as if the kitchen were a stage and he had memorized the blocking. He ladled soup into bowls and set them on the table with napkins folded in little squares. Evelyn joined later with a casserole none of us touched. The four of us sat in that room and pretended to be a family. Kevin talked about Laura in the way polite people talk about the weather. He mentioned her kindness, her smile, how she always put others first. Susan dabbed at the corners of her eyes. Evelyn kept her lips pressed, her gaze sharp and watchful. I listened. I watched. I let the conversation float around me like smoke. I noticed the way Kevin's eyes wandered along the edges of the room, pausing on the framed deed behind the glass of the bookshelf, on the mail tray where incoming and outgoing envelopes rested. I noticed how Evelyn's fingers never stopped moving, tapping, smoothing, adjusting a stack of coasters, aligning the salt and pepper shakers, the little nervous rituals of a person who cannot control her mind but wants desperately to control a table. When Kevin finally asked about my health, he did it in a voice as gentle as a hymn. "Have you been sleeping?" he asked. "You look tired." He said it like care, but his eyes said something else. They said, "How much time do we have?" After dinner, Susan began to clear the dishes. Evelyn rose to help, but Kevin laid a hand on her wrist and told her to rest. He reached into his bag again and produced a folder. He said it was a checklist for handling estate details after a loss. He said he had found it online. He said it might be helpful to stay organized. He smiled like a boy bringing a good grade to a parent. He slid the folder toward me. My stomach turned at the word he had chosen. Estate. My breath was steady. I opened it and saw printouts highlighting steps for contacting insurance, for notifying financial institutions, and for handling titles and beneficiaries. Some boxes were already checked in ink that was not mine. I closed the folder and thanked him in a voice that could have belonged to a man I used to be. He seemed satisfied. He took a sip of water. He said something about how complicated paperwork can be when people are grieving. He said he would be happy to handle calls. He said he wanted to take the burden off my shoulders. I thought of Laura's message. I thought of Susan's hand on the pen. I thought of Evelyn's eyes. I felt the old floor under my feet, the boards I had cut, sanded, and stained. I pictured how wood looks right before the varnish dries, when you can still see the grain clearly, the rings that tell the truth of a tree's life, year by year, drought and rain and growth. I told Kevin I would keep the folder in my study. He nodded. For a moment the room was quiet enough that I could hear the clock in the den tick, a small, patient sound. When they left, the house exhaled. I stood at the sink and let the water run until it was warm. I washed the 3 bowls and lined them on the rack and wiped the counter with slow, deliberate strokes. I needed that simple work, the cloth in my hand, the circles, the shine. It gave shape to an evening that wanted to come apart. When I finished, I went to the den and opened the folder again. There were notes in Kevin's printing, a list of account names, the name of our bank, the phone number, a reminder to update beneficiary designations and prepare new deed. On the bottom of one page, someone had written, "County Recorder closes at 4," and underlined it twice. I felt a heat rise in me, a clean heat, not wild like rage, but bright like a warning light that tells you a machine is running hot. It did not scare me. It woke me. In the morning, I called Daniels again. I told him what Susan had suggested about the house, that she had used the words "transfer a portion" and "right away," and that Kevin had brought a folder with steps already checked. Daniels was quiet for a moment. Then he asked whether I could bring the folder to him. I said I would. He asked whether I had agreed to anything specific. I said I had not. I told him I wanted to be careful. I told him I wanted them to believe they were winning. He didn't tell me to back off. He told me to document everything. He told me to keep copies of any papers that came into the house. He told me to leave the rest to him for the next 48 hours. I liked the sound of numbers that small. It made the problem feel like something a man could hold. That afternoon, Susan floated another idea while she wiped the kitchen table as if it were already someone else's. She said the house had too many memories, too much sorrow soaked into the walls. She said it might be gentler for us all to move on if we downsized. She had a brochure from a real estate agent she happened to meet at the store. She laid it next to my coffee and tapped it with her nail. I looked at the photo of a cheerful woman with perfect teeth, and in my head I wrote down the name. I told Susan we could discuss it after the weekend. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, almost not at all, but enough for a man who had decided to see. The next day brought the mini storm I had known was coming. Susan asked at the table, calmly as if asking me to pass the salt, if I would consider signing paperwork to put Kevin on the deed for a quarter share. She used the phrase, "for now." She used the phrase, "to help him stabilize." She mentioned the number again. A quarter, not half, not all. Just enough to look reasonable to anyone not paying attention. She even had a draft prepared by a notary she knew, with blanks for names and dates. Only a day had passed since we had stood by a casket. I looked at the notary block and the little square for a raised seal, and my stomach tightened. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I made my face soft like a man too tired to fight. I asked if we could wait until Monday. I said the weekend might give me time to feel more settled. I said a few simple words about needing to think. She sat very still. Then she gave a small nod that looked like patience, but felt like calculation. "Of course," she said. "Monday is fine." She gathered the papers and slid them into a folder labeled House. I watched where she put it. Top drawer of the desk in the front room, right side. No lock. That night, Kevin and Evelyn joined us again. They sat straighter than the night before. Evelyn made small remarks about how responsibility shows a man's character. Kevin said he wanted to honor Laura by taking care of things. They spoke in ellipses, never quite finishing a sentence, as if the next word might break the spell they were trying to cast. I let them talk. I nodded at the right moments. I made the noises of a man grateful for help. But inside, another voice had taken over. It was quieter than my anger, stronger. It said, "Let them think you're drifting. Let them believe you're going to sign. Let them relax. Let them walk into the light they think is theirs. Then turn on the switch and show them what they are. After they left, I went to my study and closed the door. I looked at the framed photo of Laura on her graduation day, cap tilted back, eyes bright. I touched the glass with 2 fingers, the way you touch a blessing. They think I've lost, I said out loud to the empty room, to the daughter whose message had pulled me back from the edge. But the game has just begun. The words surprised me with how steady they sounded. Not hopeful, not grand, just steady. The next morning, I met Daniels again. I handed him the folder Kevin had provided and the draft deed Susan had placed on the table. He laughed softly when he saw the notary block, not unkindly, but with the kind of laugh a man makes when a thief uses the same trick twice and thinks he's clever. He told me what we would do. Well, he would prepare a counter package that would look to them like we were moving forward. He would schedule a meeting with a neutral notary at his office. In the meantime, he would file a notice on the property to prevent changes to the title without my direct written approval. He would also send letters to 2 other institutions. He spoke in short sentences, each one like a brick landing where it belonged. I signed what needed signing. I initialed what needed initialing. He said he would email confirmations by evening. I shook his hand and felt that same quiet strength again, like I had plugged a cord back into a wall and the power had come on. On the way home, I stopped by the bank to add a verbal password to the account. I chose a simple word that no one else would know, a word Laura used to say when she was little and couldn't pronounce something. The manager wrote it down and smiled. She looked me in the eye and told me my account had the highest security settings they offer to private clients. She gave me her card and said that if anyone tried to make a move, she would call me herself. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. The sky was low and gray, but I could breathe more easily. I drove home without the radio again. Silence felt better. That evening, Susan made roast chicken. The smell filled the house and almost made me forget. Almost. She poured me a glass of wine and sat across from me like we were normal. She asked about my day, and I told her as little as possible. She began to speak about the notary again, about Monday, about how good it would feel to have one thing checked off so we could focus on healing. I watched her lips shape the words. I wondered how many times she had practiced that sentence in the mirror. When she excused herself to make a phone call, I knew exactly who she was calling. I could hear her voice soften in the front room, the way it softens when she wants something. I caught only a few words. Monday? No, he's fine. Yes, a quarter for now. She came back to the table smiling with her eyes, but not with her mouth. I slept in the recliner in the den that night. I told her I didn't want to keep her up with my tossing. In the dark, I listened to the house, the hum of the refrigerator. The heater is turning on and off, the occasional car rolling past outside. I let my mind walk through the plan step by step, not rushing it. Bank, done. Attorney, engaged. Documents collected. Notary, on my turf. I pictured Kevin's face when he saw the neutral office with a recorder on the table. I pictured Evelyn's jaw tightening when legal language replaced friendly talk. I pictured Susan's hands, the way her fingers would tap when she realized this road did not lead where she thought. Sunday passed quietly. Church bells rang down the block, though we didn't go. I trimmed a few branches in the yard and swept the front steps. Ordinary work, it felt good to do something that made an immediate difference, even a small one. Kevin texted to ask if we needed anything from the store. Susan replied before I could. She asked him to bring a few things. She hummed while she set the table for dinner. She tried a new perfume that smelled like hyacinth and headache. Evelyn arrived in a navy coat and complimented the table setting as if it were a competition, and she was the judge. We ate, or rather, we moved food around our plates and pretended to be hungry. Kevin looked at me with a careful tenderness and asked if I had thought any more about Monday. I told him I had. I told him I was grateful for their support. I told him I wanted to do what was right for the family. He nodded like a man accepting a medal. After they left, I went to the study and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside was a small digital recorder I had bought years ago to capture stories from my uncle about the old country. I checked the battery. I set it on the shelf where it would be visible and obvious in Daniel's conference room. No secrets, no gotchas, just a clear record. I placed my hand on the desk and felt the smooth wood under my palm. I felt a calm I hadn't felt in days. I had done what I could do. Tomorrow would come, and I would be ready. Before bed, I stood at the mantel and looked at our wedding photo again, the one that used to make me smile. The smile didn't come. I looked at Laura's baby picture. That one did. I touched the frame and let my hand rest there. "They think I'm weak," I whispered. "They think I'm tired. They think I'm alone." I straightened my shoulders. They're wrong. I picked up the folder with the draft deed and slid it into my briefcase next to Daniel's letters. I turned off the lights and listened as the house settled, the soft creaks and sighs old houses make when night lays its hand across the roof. Morning broke gray and thin. I dressed in a jacket that still fit well and shoes I had polished the night before. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and filled a thermos. Susan came in wearing pearl earrings and a blouse the color of cream. She looked like she was going to a brunch. She smiled and asked if I was ready. I told her I was. We drove in silence. When we turned into the lot behind Daniel's office, Kevin and Evelyn were already there. They stood close together, two shadows on the sidewalk, and for a second I saw what pride looks like when it forgets to hide. They thought the finish line was just ahead. We went upstairs. The receptionist smiled and offered water. Daniels came out and shook hands all around, warm and professional, not friendly, not cold. We stepped into the conference room. The recorder sat on the table in plain sight, a small red light steady as a heartbeat. Daniels explained that for clarity and to avoid confusion, he records document signings. "Standard practice," he said. "For everyone's protection." Kevin said, "Of course." Evelyn said that sounded wise. Susan said nothing. We took our seats. Papers were placed in neat stacks. Daniels began to speak in the measured rhythm of a man who knows exactly where each sentence will land. He reviewed the current title. He explained the legal meaning of a transfer. He explained the tax implications. He explained the rights that would be surrendered and the rights retained. He asked if anyone had questions. No one did. Not yet. What none of them knew was that while they were busy rehearsing their victory, a different document had been filed, a notice to the county that placed a hold on any changes to my property without my explicit, verified approval. They didn't know that my accounts were locked down, that calls would go to me and my attorney, that a password only I knew now guarded the money they wanted. They didn't know the simple, small decisions were already changing the ground under their feet. They still thought I was the same man who stood with them among the lilies and wept. I am still that man, but I am also the man I became afterward. Daniels slid a single-page document across the table toward me. He tapped the signature line with his pen and looked at me, not as a prompt, but as a question. I felt the weight of the room. I picked up the pen. The ink flowed smooth and dark. I signed my name where it mattered, and nowhere else. They didn't know that what I signed wasn't a transfer. It was permission for Daniels to request full medical records and logs for prescriptions, a step he advised for estate planning diligence. The language sounded dry. It was anything but. It set the stage for what would come next. I placed the pen down and folded my hands. In that small pause, in that small breath between sentences, I felt it. Control sliding back into my palms like the handle of a tool I knew how to use. I looked at the three faces across from me. I saw impatience flicker. I saw confusion hover. I saw a smile begin and then stall. They think I've lost. The game has just begun. And tomorrow, the poison behind their kindness will finally have a name. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment too below to let me know you're here with me. I barely slept the night before, not out of fear anymore, but but from the steady hum of decisions falling into place. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, brewed coffee, and stood by the kitchen sink while the sun crept over the maple tree out front. The house felt different in the early light, like an old friend who had decided to stand a little closer. My hands didn't shake when I lifted the mug. I had made up my mind. Today would not be about grief. Today would be about truth. I started with the pill bottle. It sat where Susan always left it, right next to the coffee, right next to my routine. "For your heart," she'd say, and I'd nod like a man grateful for care. I opened the cap and let 2 tablets fall into my palm, small, innocent, the color of trust. I turned them over with my thumb, then slipped them into a little evidence bag Daniels had given me. Digitalis. The word had a bitter edge even in my head. He had advised me quietly to collect what I could without tipping the house of cards. He'd already filed the property notice. He'd locked down the accounts. He had the recorder ready. This would be the day we stopped pretending. Susan came in with her soft smile and her pearl studs. She kissed my cheek and said I looked tired, then told me not to worry, because after our appointment with Daniels, we could finally simplify the paperwork and breathe easier. She added a gentle line about how Kevin was struggling, and the sooner we put structure around the estate, the better for everyone. She touched the pill bottle and pushed it an inch closer to me. "Don't forget," she said, her voice warm, as if the last few weeks had been nothing but casseroles and sympathy cards. I palmed the 2 pills from earlier and mimed swallowing them with a mouthful of water. It's strange the things you can do when your mind has already left helplessness behind. I set the glass down, wiped a drop from my lip, and thanked her for looking after me. I heard my voice, calm even, familiar. It surprised me how easy it was to sound like the man I used to be while becoming someone else entirely. On the drive to Daniel's office, she kept the conversation light, almost cheerful. She mentioned the utility bill. She mentioned the real estate agent she'd bumped into again at the store. She mentioned Monday as if it were a finish line we would cross hand in hand. When she finally slipped in the line she had practiced, "We'll ask Mr. Daniels to update the will so Kevin can be primary, just to simplify things since your heart has been fragile." I watched the road rather than her face. I could see our reflections in the windshield. My jaw was set. Her lips moved carefully around the word fragile. The word hung between us like a small white flag. It wasn't peace. It was a surrender. She thought it would be mine. Daniels greeted us with that steady, competent warmth of his and led us to the conference room. Leather chairs, a long table, sunlight on oak shelves lined with books that smelled like judgment and dust. On the table sat the small digital recorder with its red light steady as a heartbeat. He explained that for clarity and to protect all parties, he records meetings where legal instructions might be given. Susan nodded, perhaps a touch too quickly, and placed her purse carefully by her chair. Kevin slipped in a minute later, breathing out a performative sigh, his eyes puffy with the kind of grief that is easy to apply and easy to remove. Evelyn followed, her face set in its cool mask, her eyes scanning the edges of the room like a person checking the exits. Daniels began with pleasantries and then pivoted into business. He reviewed the property notice he'd filed to prevent changes to the title without my explicit, verified consent. His tone was smooth, matter-of-fact. "A standard protective step," he said, "given recent events." Susan folded her hands and forced a smile. Kevin glanced at Evelyn. I watched the moment land on them like a weight they hadn't expected to carry. The red light on the recorder didn't blink. It glowed with patient certainty. When Susan introduced her request in the gentle, helpful voice she had curated, "James hasn't been feeling well, his heart. We could simplify the will, make Kevin the primary for the entire estate, just to avoid confusion later." Daniels nodded as if he had been waiting for the cue. He asked her to clarify what she meant by entire estate. She said in her best neutral tone, "Everything. The house, the savings, the policy proceeds. If anything happened to me," she said, "it would all be streamlined. One name on the paperwork rather than many. Just practical, she added. Compassionate. The word clanged in my head like a dropped pan. Daniels didn't answer right away. He opened a folder and slid 3 documents into the light. The first was a letter on bank letterhead stating that my $400,000 account had been placed under a single authority freeze, requiring in-person authorization by me with a private password, effective the day before. The second was a confirmation from the insurance company acknowledging receipt of a beneficiary review request and a hold on any processing until my attorney's office completed due diligence. The third was a signed acknowledgment from the county recorder confirming the property notice. He set them side by side with the care of a man lining up dominoes. Then he folded his hands and let silence do a little work. I watched their faces. Kevin blinked. Twice. Evelyn's mouth tightened just enough to make a white line appear. Susan's smile did not change, but the fingers of her left hand began tapping her right palm under the table, an old tell she thought no one had ever noticed. She took a breath and tried a different angle. She spoke about my health in the kind of tone you use when describing a car with too many miles. His heart has been weak, she said. The stress. Not sleeping. It's been so hard on him. She put a hand on my wrist and squeezed, owning me with the gesture, then glanced at Daniels as if inviting him into a kindness. We just want to make decisions while he's still able, before any confusion. You can say almost anything to a man if you look down when you say the hard part. She looked down. I was grateful for the recorder's red light. It never looked away. Daniels asked if I wished to respond. I did. I kept my voice even. I said I appreciated everyone's concern. I said I was lucid, present, and capable of making decisions. I said I had, in fact, made several already. I repeated calmly that my accounts were secure, my property safeguarded, and any changes would proceed only after full review. I turned to Susan and added, almost gently, "No one is taking anything today." The sentence landed like a small earthquake. I felt it move through the room in a ripple, knocking a picture off an invisible wall in each of their minds. Daniels then asked a question that changed the air. He asked Susan if she had been assisting me with medication and whether she had brought any pills for me that morning. He said it the way you ask a child if he washed his hands before dinner, expecting the yes, prepared for the no. Susan blinked. Twice, like Kevin. She reached for her purse and, with a show of helpfulness, produced the bottle. "Just vitamins for his heart," she said. The doctor recommended them. She smiled at the recorder as if a machine could be charmed. Daniels opened a drawer and placed a small evidence bag on the table. He looked at me. I met his eyes and reached into my jacket pocket, producing the sealed bag with the 2 tablets I had taken at breakfast. I set it gently beside the bottle. The tap they made was soft, a pebble in a still pond. Daniel's assistant, who had slipped in quietly, took the bottle and the bag and left the room. That movement made the temperature drop. Susan started talking very quickly, saying something about supplements, about a mix-up, about how, in times like these, people forget details. Her voice fluttered, lost its footing, tried to land on compassion, and fell into nervous air. Daniels didn't raise his voice. He explained that, as a precaution, he had asked an independent lab to be on standby that morning. "We'll have a preliminary reading within the hour," he said, "and a full report by day's end." He said it the way a surgeon tells the room to prep the patient. Routine, necessary, unavoidable. Kevin broke first. He leaned forward and tried a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke about family, about trust, about how he hated the idea of lawyers and labs coming between people who loved each other. He said paperwork was cold and that grief didn't need a camcorder. He said a lot of words that bent toward the same goal: get us out of this room before anything else lands on the table. Evelyn put a hand on his sleeve, a warning disguised as comfort. She slid into the conversation with a crisp, measured voice and asked Daniels whether all this was truly necessary. "Surely," she said, "we can rely on good faith?" The phrase floated for a second like a balloon and then popped against the edge of reality. I let Daniels handle the law. I chose the truth. I told them I had spoken to my doctor the day before. I told them my resting heart rate was fine, my EKG steady, my blood pressure normal for a man my age. I told them I had asked specifically about digitalis after waking one night with a strange metallic taste in my mouth. I watched Susan's eyes when I said that word. Digitalis? Something flickered there, a candle guttering in a room with too much air. I said I had not taken any new prescribed heart medications. I said the only pills I had ingested recently were the ones provided at home, the ones she set by my coffee each morning. I didn't accuse. I narrated. It is harder to argue with narration because it doesn't push. It simply builds. The door opened. Daniel's assistant returned with a man I hadn't met, a lab technician, polite and brisk, carrying a printed sheet and the pill bottle sealed in a new bag. He spoke in short sentences. The tablets tested positive for digitalis glycosides. He used the phrase, consistent with medicinal formulations used to treat certain heart conditions, and also used the phrase, increased risk when combined with dehydration, stress, or alcohol. He placed the paper on the table and left. The room made a sound then, not quite a gasp, more like a collective exhale that no one admitted to taking. Susan's mouth opened and closed. Kevin stared at the page like it was a pop quiz in a class he hadn't attended. Evelyn's fingers stopped moving. I didn't raise my voice. I never had a prescription for digitalis, I said. Not once. My words seemed to steady themselves as they walked across the room and sat down in front of each of them. Susan started to cry, not softly, not the way a heart breaks, but the way a strategy breaks, loud, sudden, hoping to drown out the math of facts. She said she must have misunderstood. She said she thought the doctor had suggested something along those lines. She said the word suggestion as if it could pull this back from the edge. Kevin spoke in little bursts about confusion and grief and how he wasn't a medical person, and how sometimes labels look similar. Evelyn didn't speak at all. She just stared at the pill bottle as if she could will it to be a vitamin if she concentrated hard enough. Daniels pressed the recorder's timestamp button with a neat click. Then he unfolded a second set of papers. He explained, slowly, that attempts had been made to access my bank account the previous afternoon using family convenience language, but those attempts had been logged and denied. He read the note aloud. The caller claimed to be the spouse requesting temporary access due to medical distress. The note included the time. It matched the window when Susan had gone for groceries. He placed a copy of the call log beside the lab printout. He did not look at her. He didn't need to. Kevin's voice cracked. He said he had only been trying to help, that bills needed to be paid, that in a crisis people forget PINs and passwords. He stretched the words crisis and forget as if they could cover a week, a month, a plan. Evelyn's jaw tightened so hard I could see a muscle in her cheek jump. She spoke at last, precise and cold. She said lawyers turn everything ugly, that nothing had been intended except efficiency, that grief makes messes and grown-ups clean them up. She said the word grown-ups like a door closing in a child's face. Daniels waited until the room quieted. He reached for a final folder, thinner than the others, and slid it into the light. He said the county recorder had confirmed a suspicious inquiry into property transfer procedures on our parcel, made from a public computer at the library only a day after the funeral. The clerk had recorded young male, mid-30s, with older woman, asking about partial title transfers for a grieving family. He let the phrase sit there. It sounded like a costume held up on a hanger. I felt my anger rise then, not as a storm, but as a tide. It lifted me, not to rage, but to a clear view. I looked at the three of them, the triangle of their alliance wobbling on its point. I thought of the floorboards at home, the way I had sanded them on a hot summer day, with Laura bringing me lemonade and laughing at the dust in my hair. I thought of the message that night after the funeral. Dad, I'm alive. Shaster. The truth has a way of asking quietly for your attention and then taking it whether you offer it or not. There was one more sound I had been waiting for. A knock. It came. 2 agents entered with calm steps, polite and direct, introduced themselves, and presented a narrow envelope to Daniels, who skimmed it and nodded. They explained this was a courtesy interview request concerning possible prescription tampering and attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, with a note that if the vulnerable adult objected to the label, he could sign a statement of capability. I signed it. The pen felt good in my hand. My signature looked like it remembered me. Susan began to speak, too fast, too much, about vitamins, about misunderstandings, about how everyone wanted what was best for me. She reached for my arm and I moved my hand away, not dramatically, just enough for her fingers to close on air. Kevin tried to stand, then thought better of it and sat down hard. Evelyn leaned back and crossed her arms, a queen watching a court that had failed to please her. Her face said she would not be the one to beg. She would only be the one to suggest that others had misinterpreted. Daniels asked if we should take a short break. I said no, thank you, and requested that we continue on record. I looked at the agents and then at Susan. I spoke plainly. You said my heart was weak to justify taking control. You put pills in my coffee and called them vitamins. You asked my lawyer to simplify my will so Kevin would stand to inherit everything. You tried the bank while I was home, while I was breathing, while I was still supposed to be the man you married. The man you married is still here. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The room felt the height anyway. Kevin's eyes filled with water that didn't fall. He whispered something about being lost without Laura. He said the house made him feel safe. He said money had nothing to do with it. I could almost see the script in his head. He reached for it, and it slid away. Evelyn said nothing, but her silence was an argument, the kind that tries to make you feel foolish for noticing what is plain. Daniels switched the recorder off for a moment to confirm the next procedural step with the agents, then turned it back on and stated for the record that, at my instruction, he would be filing an emergency petition for a protective order concerning my medical regimen and financial instruments, pending full investigation. He asked if I consented. I did. He asked me to describe the pills again, how they were presented, the timing, and the phrases used. I did. He asked if there had been pressure regarding the house. I described the quarter share plan and the rush to sign with a familiar notary. He looked at the agents. One of them wrote down the notary's name. The other asked if I had kept any pills or packaging. I told him I had and that there were additional tablets at home. He asked if I would consent to a search of the kitchen area for medication. I agreed on the condition that Daniels or his assistant be present when the items were taken into custody. He said that would be fine. Susan covered her face with her hands and spoke through her fingers. She used the word mistake 3 times, each time softer, as if volume could make it true. She said she had been scared. She said she had seen me awake at night and panicked. She said a friend told her about digitalis and she thought it might help. She said she didn't research enough. She said she never meant harm. She said she was just trying to do the right thing. She said, right like a bridge that wouldn't hold a man's weight. Kevin added that he never knew what the pills were, that he had trusted Susan, that he had enough on his plate with the grief, and that he couldn't be expected to check every bottle. Evelyn finally leaned in and said the words I had expected all along. This is being blown out of proportion, she said. People make errors under stress. We can resolve this like adults, without spectacle. The agent's pen did not pause. I did not look away. They think I'm weak, I said, mostly to myself, but loud enough that the recorder would catch it. They think I'll fold. I straightened the papers in front of me and felt the steadiness in my spine. They're about to learn what happens when you count a man out before he has even begun. I didn't add one more word. I didn't need to. What happened next was neither theatrical nor loud. It was simple. Daniels summarized the record. He placed the lab's preliminary findings with the other documents. The agents collected the pill bottle, Susan signed an acknowledgement that she had provided the tablets. Kevin signed a statement noting his presence and his lack of prescription knowledge. Evelyn declined to sign anything and asked for counsel. The recorder captured each small sound, the scratch of pens, the turn of a page, the muffled hum of the HVAC. Ordinary noises, the kind that narrate the end of a plan. We left the office in 2 small waves. The agent spoke with Susan in a quiet side room. Kevin lingered in the hallway and tried to catch my eye. He looked younger then, thinner. He asked if we could talk, just us? I told him calmly that everything would be just us from now on, in writing, on record, with dates and times, and the truth laid out in plain sight. He didn't know where to put his hands. He tried his pockets. He tried crossing his arms. He finally let them hang. Evelyn walked past without speaking, the click of her heels a metronome of pride. She did not look back. Outside, the sky had cleared. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of rain, even though the clouds were already breaking. Daniel stood with me by the edge of the lot and went over the next steps. He would file the petition before the close of business. He would courier a copy of the lab's preliminary report to my doctor. He would notify the bank of potential criminal interference. He asked if I felt safe going home tonight. I said yes. He handed me a slim envelope with copies of the day's documents and the call log. He looked at me for a long second, not searching, just seeing. "You did well," he said. "You stayed steady. That matters." I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the fresh air fill the car. When I pulled onto our street, the maple leaves were moving like flags. I parked and sat for a while, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I looked at the house, the front steps I had painted in late spring, the door I had hung straight after a stubborn hinge, the window where Laura used to wave when I pulled in from work. My hands rested on the wheel until I noticed they were still. No tremor, no rush, just stillness. I walked inside and the place smelled like lemon oil and something sweeter, the perfume Susan had used that morning. I stood in the entry and let the rooms find their shape around me. The mantel, the recliner, the framed photos. They hadn't changed. I had. I set the envelope on the table, then picked it up again and carried it to the study, where I placed it in the top drawer of the locked file cabinet that still held every tax return I had filed for 30 years. I closed the drawer, turned the key, and slid it into my pocket. Then I went back to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I drank it slowly and let each swallow mark the end of something old and the start of something new. The phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Kevin, a string of sentences about misunderstandings and pain and how he wished we could reset. He asked if I would consider a short meeting just to clear the air. I typed a sentence and then deleted it. I typed another. I settled on this. All future communication goes through counsel. I pressed send and waited for the 3 dots to appear. They didn't. The silence felt like a kind of mercy. I took the pill bottle from the cabinet and set it in a brown paper bag. I wrote the date and time on the outside in block letters and placed it on the counter for the agents to collect. Then I turned off the kitchen light and walked to the den. I stood in front of Laura's graduation photo, the one where the sun caught her hair and made a halo that the camera wasn't expensive enough to ruin. "They thought I was alone," I said quietly. "I'm not." I rested 2 fingers on the frame and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, my breath went all the way down to where it needed to. By the time darkness fell, the plan I hadn't asked for had finished making itself visible. The house was quiet. The neighborhood lights blinked on one by one like assurances. I sat in the recliner and let the day replay, not to relive it, but to fix it in place. The recorder's red light, the lab report, the call log. Susan's hand is reaching for air. Kevin's voice is cracking. Evelyn's heels. Daniel's steady pen. The agent's calm explanations. The ordinary ritual of signatures is when a story finally stops pretending to be something else. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it clicks and stamps and files and confirms until even the loudest lie has nowhere to stand. I knew what would come next: paperwork, hearings, perhaps a courtroom with dark wood and a flag in the corner, perhaps more tests and more printouts with words like therapeutic range and contraindicated. I knew there would be calls I wouldn't answer and letters I would forward to Daniels. I knew there would be nights where the anger tried to rattle its old chains just to see if I would open the door. But I also knew this: the center had shifted. The ground belonged to me again. The house, the savings, the policy, the name on the deed, mine, 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 not as trophies, but as responsibilities, not as spoils, but as stewardship. When I finally turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs, the boards under my feet sounded the way they always have on cold nights, a low, kind creak that says a house is paying attention. At the top step, I paused and looked back down at the dim outline of the living room, the square of light from the street lamp, the edge of the mantel catching a pale glow. "It's time to finish this," I said into the quiet. My voice didn't echo. It didn't need to. The house heard me. I heard myself. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the last dry leaves against the gutters. Tomorrow would bring forms to sign and statements to read, and likely more attempts at explanation. Tomorrow might bring the first official paper with a case number stamped in the top right corner. Tomorrow might bring peace, or maybe peace would come a day later. It didn't matter. The important part had already happened. The lie had finally met the light. And when lies meet light, they shrink. I closed the bedroom door and set my phone on the nightstand. For a moment, I watched the tiny flashing notification from the alarm company on the panel by the door, the slow, steady blink that says everything is armed, the windows are latched, the doors are secure. I smiled at the thought. The house was locked from the inside as well as the outside now. My life was too. They thought I was weak. They thought I would sign. They thought my grief would weigh more than my will. They were wrong. I pulled the blanket up, let the room settle, and breathed in the plain, good air of a night that had earned its rest. In the quiet, one sentence rose and settled like a promise. Now is the time to end the game. Feeling dismissed, being treated like I didn't matter, that hurt more than anything, didn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and to receive justice, comment the keyword, justice. Now watch what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I walked out of that courthouse with papers in my hand and the weight of months lifted from my chest. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying grief like a chain around my neck. I was carrying victory. The judgment was clear. The house, worth $750,000, was mine. The $400,000 sitting in savings remained locked under my name. The life insurance policy, valued at a full $1 million, had been confirmed as untouchable. Everything they had tried to take, every dollar, every brick, every memory, I had kept it. More than that, I had won it back in front of the world, and they had been forced to watch the truth unfold in cold daylight. When I drove home that evening, I passed the old streets that had once felt safe, once felt like family. Each turn of the wheel carried me past reminders of what had been lost, birthdays celebrated, holidays shared, nights filled with laughter. But I knew those walls, those rooms, had been poisoned by betrayal. The house itself was solid, but the air inside was heavy with deceit. So I made a choice. I listed it. The day the realtor's sign went into the yard, I stood at the window and watched strangers slow their cars to look. And I thought, let them take the walls. The memories will stay with me. The poison can stay behind. Within a month, it was sold. $750,000 exchanged hands, and I walked away without looking back. I took a portion of that money and bought a small condo, $220,000. Nothing extravagant. It was near the park where Laura and I used to walk when she was young. The view wasn't grand, but it was peaceful. A row of maple trees lined the street, and when the sun came through the leaves in the morning, it painted the living room in gold. The first night I slept there, The quiet wasn't suffocating. It was gentle. I sat on the balcony with a mug of coffee, the air cool against my skin, and I whispered into the silence. "Laura, we made it. We're free." For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt her close. Not as a ghost, not as grief, but as peace. As for Susan, Evelyn, and Kevin, their downfall was sharp and merciless. Susan lost everything she thought she controlled. The accounts she had tried to access were closed to her. The property she had schemed to claim was gone. The reputation she had wrapped around herself like a fine coat was shredded. Evelyn, with her cold calculation, was dragged into the same pit. The whispers around town grew louder. People who once nodded politely now looked away. The grand woman who had once carried herself like a queen now rented a small unit on the edge of the city. Her pride the only crown left, and even that was tarnished. Kevin faced the investigators. Papers were filed. Statements were taken. The law does not move quickly, but it moves steadily, and he learned what it feels like when every lie you tell is matched with evidence stronger than your excuses. Their faces were splashed with shame, and where once they had walked tall, now they kept their eyes low. I did not rejoice in their ruin, but I did not mourn it either. It was the shape of justice. It was what happens when you trade loyalty for greed, when you forget that blood means nothing without respect. Their names might still be tied to mine by memory, but I severed every living tie. Susan wrote me once a letter that came folded in 3 with my name trembling on the envelope. She said she was sorry. She said she had lost herself in fear and confusion. She asked for forgiveness, not for what she had done, but for what she had allowed to happen. I read it only once. Then I put it back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer without reply. Forgiveness is not something I owe to the person who tried to poison me, legally or otherwise. My silence was my answer. I chose my dignity over the false comfort of reconciliation. Sitting in my new home, I learned to breathe again. Mornings became mine. I'd grind the coffee beans slowly, listening to the sound of the grinder echo in the quiet kitchen. I'd sit by the balcony with the park spread out in front of me. Children's laughter would float up from the swings. Dogs barked in the distance. Life went on, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I was not carrying it on my shoulders. I had put down the burden. I had walked away from the battlefield, not as a defeated man, but as a survivor. I had found my own ground again. A simple ground, a clean ground. The contrast between my peace and their downfall was striking. I found myself smiling more easily. I even joined a small book club at the library nearby, something I had always put off when life felt too full of responsibility. I found myself laughing at jokes that weren't very funny, simply because laughter came easier now. Meanwhile, Susan and Evelyn became whispers. Kevin became a warning. People in town spoke of them with pity or disdain, and their names no longer carried weight. They had lost the very thing they had chased: control, wealth, respect. They had nothing left but shadows of what they had thrown away. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset bleed across the sky, I thought about the nature of family. I thought about how often we give everything to the people we love, assuming that love will be enough to hold them true. I thought about the tuition I paid, the car I bought, the house I built, the sleepless nights spent worrying over bills and futures. And I thought about how all of that could be brushed aside by greed sharper than any knife. The lesson came to me quietly, like the rustle of leaves in the park. Family is not blood alone. Family is respect. Family is truth. And when respect and truth are gone, blood is just water that ties you to people who will drown you if you let them. I knew then that my future would not be spent mourning the betrayal. It would be spent living. I had already begun. I was lighter, stronger, and free. The betrayal had cut me, but it had also carved me into someone who understood what mattered: self-respect, boundaries, peace. I whispered into the evening, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." And the words did not echo back empty. They filled the space around me with certainty. The next morning, I signed up for something new. a community charity program that focused on helping older adults manage their estates and protect themselves from exploitation. It felt like the right place to be, the right way to turn my pain into purpose. If my story could prevent even one person from suffering what I had endured, then it would mean the suffering had not been in vain. That step felt small, but it was the bridge into a new chapter, a chapter that was not about surviving betrayal, but about living beyond it. My life had changed. The battlefield was behind me. The scars were there, yes, but they no longer burned. They had healed into reminders, and every reminder carried a lesson. Dignity is worth more than any fortune. Truth is stronger than lies, and peace, once claimed, is worth guarding with everything you have. I leaned back in my chair on the balcony and closed my eyes, the sound of laughter drifting up from the park. The world was still turning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally turning with it. The war was over. The peace was mine. And in that peace, I found the truest victory of all. I wake up each morning in my new condo, the one I bought for $220,000 with cash that nobody could touch but me. The place isn't big, but it's just right. The walls are freshly painted in a warm cream color. The balcony overlooks the park, and in the kitchen, the coffee pot sits ready for me, steady as clockwork. It's simple, it's peaceful, and it's mine. After everything I went through, the peace of owning this space feels like a victory, greater than any courtroom decision. I pay my bills with money from my own account, still solid at $400,000 in savings, still protected under my name alone. I walk across the hardwood floors knowing no one else has a claim to them. No signatures behind my back. No whispered plots. Just me and the life I fought to preserve. I keep the mornings for myself. I sit out on the balcony with a steaming mug, watching the sun rise through the maple trees across the street. Their leaves shift from green to orange as the season changes, and I remind myself that change can be beautiful, even when it feels painful at first. I breathe in the air, sip slowly, and whisper sometimes into the quiet, "Laura, we made it." I used to ache when I said her name, but now it feels more like a promise kept. I protected her memory by refusing to let greed drag me down. I protected the life we built, and in doing so, I found a way to protect myself too. Susan and Evelyn, on the other hand, no longer live like queens. They rent a cramped little apartment in a tired building on the edge of the city. The rent eats into what little they have, and the days of polished nails, designer clothes, and catered luncheons are gone. I heard from a neighbor that Evelyn had to sell her jewelry piece by piece just to stay afloat. Susan tried to reach me once, a voicemail this time, asking if I would meet for coffee. Her voice cracked, not with sincerity, but with desperation. I didn't call her back. I don't need her apology. I don't need her words. I have my life now, and that is more than enough. Kevin, well, his story ended behind bars. The fraud, the poisoning attempt, the evidence I carried to court, it all sealed his fate. When I think of him now, I don't feel pity. I feel nothing, and that nothingness is my freedom. One afternoon, as I was sorting through mail at the kitchen table, I found an envelope addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from an old friend, Bill, a man I hadn't spoken to since our kids were in high school. He'd heard what happened through the town whisper mill, and instead of pity, he offered something else, an invitation. He ran a small support group for older single fathers, men who had lost their spouses, men who were raising kids alone, or men who, like me, had been left to pick up the pieces after betrayal. He invited me to join. I sat there staring at the letter, feeling an odd warmth. For so long, I thought my story ended in isolation, but maybe it was opening into something new. I folded the letter carefully, set it on the table, and smiled. The next week, I showed up. We drank coffee in styrofoam cups, shared stories that were both painful and healing, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in the room. I felt understood. That small step turned into something larger. I found myself going to the group each week, listening more than speaking at first, but slowly opening up. I realized my story had weight, not just for me, but for others. When I told them how I had been betrayed by people I once trusted most, men nodded, women leaned forward, eyes wide. And when I told them I had fought back, that I had walked out free with my dignity and assets intact, I saw sparks of hope in their faces. It reminded me of something powerful. Pain, when shared honestly, can turn into purpose. That realization gave me more peace than money ever could. As the weeks passed, I thought more about the lessons this ordeal carved into me. For parents, I say this with all my heart. Don't let your sacrifices be taken for granted. It's noble to give, to support, to provide, but there must be balance. Don't let love blind you to the point where your own dignity becomes disposable. We must remember that giving is an act of love, not a license for others to exploit. To the children I say, gratitude is the measure of your character. Every dollar your parents spent, every night they stayed awake worrying about you, every sacrifice, they weren't owed, they were gifts. And gifts deserve respect. Without gratitude, wealth is empty, and character is lost. And to the world as it stands now, I say this: human nature shows its true colors when money is at stake. Greed strips the mask off faster than anything else, but so does integrity. If betrayal reveals ugliness, then resistance reveals strength. And in the modern world, where temptation whispers in every corner, we must hold on to character as if it were gold. One evening, I sat on the balcony as the park lights flickered on below. Families walked dogs, children clutched their parents' hands, and laughter drifted up through the branches. I thought about Susan, sitting in her dim rental with Evelyn, probably bitter and resentful. I thought about Kevin, locked away, counting days on a wall. And then I thought about myself, sitting in a chair with peace in my chest. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. They were chained to the consequences of their choices, while I was free in the light of mine. That freedom came not just from money, but from boundaries, from the refusal to keep a poisoned tie alive. I said aloud, though only the leaves could hear me, I don't need their apology. I have my life. Inside the condo, on a shelf by the window, I keep one object that grounds me every day. It's an old pocket watch, tarnished but still ticking, passed down from my father. I set it there when I moved in, and every time I glance at it, I'm reminded of his words. Your name and your character are the only two things that matter. Lose one, and the other will follow. That watch, more than the money in the bank or the title on the condo deed, feels like my inheritance. And it's the inheritance I want to pass forward, even if only in spirit. That character cannot be stolen. It must be guarded. It must be lived. So I live. I water the small plants on my balcony. I read books I once ignored. I laugh with the group of single fathers who became brothers in spirit. And when I think of the past, I don't ache anymore. I feel resolved. The chapter is closed, not with bitterness, but with clarity. My dignity is intact, my life is mine again, and each day is proof that I chose rightly. Family, I've learned, is not always those who share your blood. Family is those who respect you, who honor your sacrifices, who don't see your worth in dollars, but in love. Blood can betray, but respect is the bond that holds true. And character is the one asset no one can rob from you, no matter how hard they try. I don't answer Susan's letters. I don't listen to Evelyn's messages. I don't ask about Kevin's days in prison. Those ties are severed. My boundary is drawn. And in that boundary, I have found peace that no betrayal can break. As I sip my coffee in the morning, as I listen to the laughter from the park, as I watch the leaves turn gold and red, I know I am exactly where I'm meant to be. The storm is over. The air is clear. And I finally belong to myself. Family, real family, are the ones who respect you. And character is the only wealth no one can ever take away. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.